Hello, I'm Peter Okwacha. Welcome to Focus on Africa. Our top stories.
The Norwegian Nobel Committee has decided to award the Nobel Peace Prize for 2019 to Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed Ali.
That's right, Ethiopia's Prime Minister wins the Nobel Prize for ending the long-running border war with Eritrea. He said it was a prize for the whole continent.
It is a prize given to Africa, given to Ethiopia, and I can imagine how the rest of Africa leaders will take it positively.
Charges, claims and controversy. It's been a dramatic race to the top as Tunisia's two presidential hopefuls prepare for Sunday's runoff vote. Also on the program, a financial lifeline for women in Senegal with cancer. The government is now covering the cost of chemotherapy for cervical and breast cancer. And can he run a marathon in under 2 hours? This weekend, Kenya's Eliud Kipchoge will attempt to break that elusive barrier. Thanks for joining us here on Focus on Africa from BBC World News. Humbled and thrilled. That was Ethiopian Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed's reaction to winning this year's Nobel Peace Prize. The Nobel Committee hailed Mr. Ahmed's decisive role in ending the long-running border dispute with Eritrea. Mr. Ahmed said he hopes the award will inspire other African leaders to work for peace. Kalkidan Yebeltal reports from Addis Ababa.
The Norwegian Nobel Committee believes it is now that Abiy Ahmed's efforts deserve recognition and need encouragement.
It's a reward for his efforts to bring about peace between Ethiopia and Eritrea, neighboring countries that have been sworn enemies for years. This was the moment Abiy received the news from the Nobel Committee.
I want to congratulate you with receiving this year's Nobel Peace Prize.
Thank you very much. I'm so humbled and thrilled when I just heard the news. Thank you very much.
Abiy has been recognized for his drive for reconciliation and for his social reforms that include promoting multiple women into high-profile posts and mediating a peace deal in Sudan. Here in Addis Ababa, prominent figures and ordinary people alike have been sharing their views since the announcement was made. Many people, including some of Abiy's opponents, seem to be united in congratulating him for being the first Ethiopian to win the Nobel Peace Prize.
This provides Ethiopia with a significant muscle in terms of international diplomacy and a significant responsibility to pursue peace, because it is now in the eyes of the international community.
The award is for the recognition of his contribution to restore peace between Ethiopia and Eritrea. So in that respect, I think he deserves the award, and I would like to congratulate him. But when it comes to the domestic politics, I think Abiy has a lot to do.
Abiy has described this as a prize for all of Africa and the hopes for peace building on the continent. But the first test will be to see if the prize changes lives in Ethiopia. Kalkidan Yebeltal, BBC News, Addis Ababa.
Well, Abiy Ahmed's Nobel Peace Prize win has been warmly received by his international counterparts. Here's a flavor of what's being said. The Secretary General of the UN, Antonio Guterres, tweeted to congratulate Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed for his remarkable work to end the 20-year conflict between Ethiopia and Eritrea. Liberia's leader, George Weah, also sent his warmest felicitations for this noble feat. And Nigeria's President Muhammadu Buhari said this recognition is a good sign for peace processes within countries and across borders in Africa. Well, Professor Laura Hammond is from the School of Oriental and African Studies here in London. She's been following Abiy Ahmed very closely. First of all, he's only been in office for barely a year and a half. Are you surprised he's won it this quickly?
Somewhat surprised. Some people will say he's not been fully tried yet, but he came in with a big bang. He immediately announced his intention to seek the peace with Eritrea. He immediately not only recognized that Ethiopia had political prisoners, but then released thousands of them. He elevated women to unprecedented levels in government. The freedom of press in Ethiopia is open again in a way that it hasn't been for years. So a really strong kind of showing immediately. Some of his critics will say, though, that there is work to be done at home.
Absolutely. Let's just break that down bit by bit and talk about this peace process with Eritrea. Can we say that peace has now been secured between Ethiopia and Eritrea?
It's not fully secured. I mean, peace takes a long time to build, and some of the major obstacles to reaching that peace have now been overcome. There's communication, there's movement back and forth, the leaders are speaking to each other. The public appetites in both countries were really ripe, ready for this rapprochement to happen. But there are still, the devil's in the details, and there are still a lot of little things that need to be worked out before we can really say that the peace and the conflict is completely behind.
And you mentioned his critics there talking about the situation back at home. He has done a few things right, tried to loosen the government's tight grip on society. But some people say those efforts have now uncovered ethnic tensions. 2.5 million people have been displaced. And people say he's kind of neglected this fact.
That's true, and that people say that he hasn't done enough fast enough. I think that one of the kind of side effects, if you like, of that political opening has been that people feel emboldened to speak and to air their grievances. And so that, although it's a painful process right now, may ultimately not be such a bad thing. But I think Abiy and the government of Ethiopia really need to get a handle on, without going back to repression, to try to find ways of bringing about some local level reconciliations before really we can move forward.
And apart from that, there's still, you mentioned freedoms of the press. There's still journalists who are in jail. Sometimes the internet in the country is shut down. The Nobel Peace Prize Committee have said, well, we also hope that this will be, this will spur him to do even more. Do you think that's possible?
Right. I think so. I think that it's a great boost of confidence for not just for Abiy, but for Ethiopia and for Ethiopians to know that this process is being recognized and people are watching it carefully. So that's really important. But I think that it was interesting that in the announcement about the award, the chairwoman of the committee said, some will say it's too early, and we say this is about encouraging not just what has been achieved, but what is to be achieved. And internationally,
we just heard in that report, one of the speakers in that report saying this will actually help Ethiopia standing in the international forums. How does that work?
Well, that's quite significant, because Berhanu Nega has been one of the main opposition leaders. So to say that is a major vote of confidence. So I think that it elevates Abiy's standing both within the region, within Africa. Addis Ababa is the headquarters of the African Union, but as well, we're going in December, there will be a global refugee forum, which Ethiopia is a co-host of. So even on that global stage, his standing will be that much more profound, I think, because of this.
Professor Laura Hammond from SOAS here in London, thank you very much for your time. Thank you. Let's take a quick look now at other stories making the headlines across Africa and the rest of the world. US President Donald Trump says he will push for stringent controls over the resettlement of Somali refugees in the state of Minnesota. He was speaking at a campaign rally in the state, which hosts one of the largest populations of Somali refugees in the US. Let's hear what he had to say.
For many years, leaders in Washington brought large numbers of refugees to your state from Somalia, without considering the impact on schools and communities and taxpayers. I promise you that as president, I would give local communities a greater say in refugee policy and put in place enhanced vetting and responsible immigration controls.
South Africa's former president Jacob Zuma has failed to stop a corruption trial against him from going ahead. The country's High Court unanimously dismissed his application for a permanent stay of prosecution. He's accused of 16 counts of fraud, racketeering and money laundering relating to a multi-billion-dollar arms deal in the 1990s. Eric Kabendera, an investigative journalist in Tanzania, who is facing economic crimes offences, has requested to enter a plea bargain, a local court in Dar es Salaam heard today. He's facing charges of money laundering, tax evasion, and leading a criminal organization. He was arrested in August, but the government has been heavily criticized by activists who say the charges are politically motivated. Now, this Sunday, a business tycoon fresh out of jail and a conservative academic are set to battle it out in Tunisia's presidential election runoff. Media mogul Nobel Karoui walked free from prison just 2 days ago after spending more than a month behind bars over a money laundering probe and tax evasion. He will square off against blunt-talking independent law professor Kais Said. Well, let's get more now from the BBC's Rana Jawad, who is in Tunis. Rana, what's the mood in Tunisia ahead of Sunday's runoff?
Well, it's certainly not the mood that we saw in 2014, which is when the first free and fair election was held that brought in the former and late President Beji Sipsi. You know, there's a lot of worry today, but I wouldn't chalk it up to political apathy per se, which is quite common in this region around election time. But there seems to be, talking to the electorate at least, or some in the electorate, a deeper understanding of the importance of this political process and the choices that they make, and they need to be convinced of the candidate that they're voting for. But of course, you know, they have two contenders who are outside the so-called political establishment, and there are no guarantees with either of them as far as many voters are concerned, and certainly many of those who stayed away from the polls the first time around. So it will be interesting to see who turns, or rather the rate of turnout in the upcoming election on Sunday.
And Rana, what are the issues that people will be voting for come Sunday?
Well, the primary concern, as research by a number of polling companies have shown here, is the economy. It's always the economy, jobs. There are other things like social development, healthcare that needs to be improved. There's a severe ongoing brain drain from the country that needs to be addressed. But of course, these are matters that are not necessarily in the hands of the presidency, but rather the government, which needs to be appointed by the parliament, which was also only recently elected. And it may have its own problems because of the diverse makeup of the political blocs that have won in these legislative elections. So the president's role then becomes more important, you know, bringing together all these different political blocs. And I think if you look at the demographics voting for each candidate, each of them in some way represents a solution or for the economy. In the eyes of their supporters. For Nobel Karoui, the media mogul, he's seen as a man who is a successful businessman, who is also a philanthropist, perhaps representing the Tunisian version of the so-called American dream. And he has an economic plan, although it hasn't been communicated very well to the public. And so they'll be seeing him as a possible solution. And for Kais Said's supporters, who see him as a man of the law, because he's a professor in constitutional law, they think that none of their corruption issues and the economical issues that they face can be solved if the law is not applied. And that's where he draws a lot of support from.
Okay, Rana Jawad, live from Tunis. Thank you very much. This is Focus on Africa from BBC World News with me, Peter Okoche. Still to come, more from Mimi's interview with Wilfred Zaha today. He talks about playing at national level and switching allegiance from England to Ivory Coast. I'm Peter Okoche. The top story this hour. Ethiopian Prime Minister Ahmed Abiy says he is humbled and thrilled to win this year's Nobel Peace Prize, saying it's a prize for the whole continent. In Senegal, the biggest cancer killers of women are cervical and breast cancer. Now the government is offering free chemotherapy in all public hospitals to women who have been diagnosed with either cancer. They've set aside $16 million annually to cover the cost of the drugs, but women undergoing treatment could still be facing large bills to complete their treatment. They still have to pay for tests and, if they need it, surgery and radiotherapy. Louise Dawast reports from Dakar.
Breast and cervical cancers are believed to be the most common types of female cancers in Senegal, and so news that chemotherapy to treat them will be free has resonated positively.
I'm really happy about it. It's really something that should be applauded. It's exceptional because there are so many women who have cancer and can't pay the treatment. They could die, but now it's free. We have to thank God, really.
Not all types of treatments will be free, but this measure could help 80 to 90% of patients.
Often with chemotherapy, the drugs represent 80% of the total cost of treatment paid for by the patient. So if we make the drugs free, nearly all the treatment is free.
The government also says it is subsidizing some of the drugs needed to treat side effects of chemotherapy, but critics say it is not enough to effectively reduce cancer mortality. This is Awa Florence. She was diagnosed with cervical cancer last year. She has gone through 4 cycles of chemotherapy already.
It's really expensive. When all this started, I had to sell everything I owned. I don't have anything left. I am a widow and I don't have the means to pay for further tests.
She is hopeful this new initiative will help her, but she also has some reservations.
Sometimes you have drugs that you need to buy urgently, and you can't go to the Anti-Cancer League or to the government. We don't know yet. They say it's for free, but we don't know if we will need to fill out paperwork here and there. We don't know. And if it's urgent.
While this measure is a good first step, experts say that effective cancer management requires addressing healthcare as a whole. Louise Dawast, BBC News, Dakar.
You're watching BBC Focus on Africa. It's now time for some sports. Mimi?
Thank you, Peter. Now, on Saturday, Kenya's Eliud Kipchoge will in Vienna, Austria, try to do what no man has ever done before, run a marathon in under 2 hours. While this won't count as a world record because of the assistance he is receiving, such as constantly revolving pacemakers, it would break one of the mythical barriers in sport. We've been taking a closer look.
It's about making history. We want to see the first human being making history. It's like the first person to land in the moon.
On Saturday, 12th October, Eliud Kipchoge will try to do what no man has ever done before, run a marathon in under 2 hours. He first tried in 2017 in Monza, Italy, missing out by less than half a minute. So what is different this time around to allow the Kenyan such confidence?
The course is actually pretty good. It's a straight of 4.4 kilometers. One lap is 9.6 kilometers. Very flat.
It's also crucially in the organizers' eyes, less humid than Monza, so allowing Kipchoge to better regulate his body temperature. The 2017 challenge was sparsely attended and the desire for large crowds to line the route was high up on Kipchoge's wish list.
I think there will be actually thousands of spectators that day. When you have spectators, actually they are pushing you.
He has grown much physically fitter. He's right now in the best shape that he could ever be. Physically and everything.
In Monza, I was like a boxer going to the ring and he doesn't know what happened in the ring. Either will be knocked down or you will be successful. But this time, I'm going to Vienna, knowing what I will be doing. I believe I can run under 2 hours. Reason is that I have tried before, 2 years ago. It's really heavy, but this is making history, and I know I'll get it.
And in the streets of Nairobi, Kenya, fans believe that he can achieve that sub-2-hour marathon. Now, more from my exclusive interview with Crystal Palace's Wilfried Zaha from earlier in the week, where he spoke about his club football. Today, we look at what it means playing for his country. In 2016, Zaha switched allegiance from England, where he didn't play a competitive game, to Ivory Coast. It's a decision he tells me he has no regrets about.
Most African players play in Europe. Obviously, the top players play in Europe. And obviously, there's so many players that would love to represent their country, but feel like going back to their country, they may not get as much as they may get from another country. So that's what makes them not sure of going to play for your own country. But me personally, I feel like I made the right decision because I'm trying to leave a legacy in my country. So no matter what, things will change eventually. How we want them to change, but the legacy is the main. Yeah, proper support really. That's it, just 100% backing, really.
Let's move more now to your country, the Ivory Coast. You played at the Africa Cup of Nations this summer in Egypt, your second Africa Cup of Nations. What are your objectives with your country?
My objective is to firstly win AFCON, because I feel like the team's so talented and we have the ability to do that. So definitely to win AFCON, hopefully to win many AFCONs as long as I'm there, and just get through to the World Cup and go as far as we can really. That's what I want to do with my country, and I feel like we can do it because we've got many talented players. We just need to buckle down and just work together. I'm proud because my country is known for obviously players like Yaya Toure, Kolo Toure, Drogba. There's many names that I could name, but it's massive, and it's just like, I'm glad that I can be part of all of that, part of that footballing culture. And I'm just proud to just be from Africa in general, really.
Now, he's smiling. Why wouldn't he be? Just before I came on air on social media, he thanked people for voting. That's because Gabon's Pierre-Emerick Aubameyang has been named September's English Premier League Player of the Month. He scored 5 goals in 4 league appearances for Arsenal last month, including a late free kick to win against Aston Villa. The African star beat Trent Alexander-Arnold, Kevin De Bruyne, Son Heung-min, and Algeria's Riyad Mahrez to the award. And Aubameyang's rich goal-scoring form has carried on during his international window. The 30-year-old was also on target for Gabon on Thursday in a 1-0 win over Burkina Faso in a friendly in France. That's it, Peter.
Before you go, Mimi, I mean, that's a great interview with Wilfried Zaha. I've been running all week. A lot of people talking about it. Do you think he's over not moving to the great Arsenal?
You would say that as an Arsenal fan. I'm not going to say much of what he said off the record, but it was a very honest and open interview. And he said he's going to focus this season on Crystal Palace, and we'll see next season what happens.
Good for him. Thank you very much, Mimi. Now, Cameroonian British student has come up with a novel way to get himself noticed to find a job in London. Bapek stands outside a busy tube station holding a cardboard sign asking for work placement. And he's now become quite the celebrity, so much so that he's gone viral on social media with more than 1 million views on Twitter. And his persistence is paying off. He's told the BBC he's already had 1 job interview and has many others lined up. Great for him. That's it on Focus on Africa for today and for this week. Thanks for watching. See you again very soon. Goodbye.